immediately the force of gravity. But for the engines to pull it up, it takes a long time, and it needs an awful lot of energy and time and effort. And this is one of the greatest robbers we have of our faith. The other robber, which is just as dangerous, is bad company. Bad company. Baha'u'llah has told us that we must associate with the godly, with the people, and eschew fellowship, he says. These are his own words. Eschew fellowship with the ungodly. Now, the ungodly does not mean a person who doesn't believe in God. Remember that. Oh no. The ungodly is a person who comes between you and Baha'u'llah, and who says to you, well, look, you are a Baha'i, okay, but let us go and do this, let us go and do that. Directs you to do things against the teachings of the faith. I've seen many people who become Baha'is, young people especially. The young people are more targets for this, much more than the older ones, in schools, in colleges, in society. I've seen some young people who come into the faith with great joy and excitement, and after a month you hear, where are they? Oh, well, this boy had a friend and is involved with a friend, and that's it. He's gone. The friend has pulled him the other way. The ungodly does not mean a person who doesn't believe in God, is agnostic or atheist. The ungodly may be a person who confesses in a very religion in a very sincere way. But a person who is an agnostic and an atheist may not be an ungodly person. He may be a very good person. And in fact, most of them are very honest people, very good. Most people who become agnostics or atheists, I think they're very honest people. They find that religion has been so misrepresented and so distorted in their ways by those who confess to have a religion, that they have just said, we don't want this. This is very honest. So, this is the second dangerous thing that could rob us of our faith, really. We have seen amongst the young people, so many young people who have been destroyed, completely gone away because of this bad company, completely destroyed. People who were brought up even as Baha'is, and then the bad company, they got in contact with so many bad associates, and then they took them away. And the other one, finally, the third one, another thing which I'm sure doesn't happen in America, it's gossip. Really, backbiting. This is something which is, we must always talk good of the people. Always talk good of the people. Talking with people. Somebody said, when do we draw the line? We can always talk about people, but when can we say it is backbiting? You know, sometimes you talk about people. When does it become backbiting? I thought, I said to him, when you begin to enjoy it, it becomes backbiting. You know. Really, that's what happens. These three things, I think, are just enough for us to concentrate on these points and try to guard ourselves against this. We must always talk good of the people. Beautiful. Every Baha'i is so beautiful because the power of faith is working within that person. Because as I said this morning, well, we are related to Baha'u'llah. I am only related to him by name. That's all I can say. But that's a tremendous honor, tremendous. Well, now, having said this, let us go a little bit to the subject of the covenant. I wanted to mention maybe about half an hour here and talk about covenant. Again, yesterday we touched upon this. I mentioned that Baha'u'llah brought for us a great ocean of his revelation, a real ocean. In the dispensations of the past, the manifestations of the past, they brought also the Word of God. But in relation to what Baha'u'llah has brought in this day, it was not an ocean, it was a small pond, you might say. But they brought the water of life. Every one of the prophets of God who have come, they bring with them the water of life. And that water of life, when they are alive, when the manifestations of God are alive and they are with man and they are walking with man and talking with man, that water of life is fresh. It's like rain. You know, the Word of God is like the coming of rain. When the rain comes, you become refreshed by it directly. You know, it comes to you and hits you directly. You become refreshed by it directly. But when the rain stops, when the manifestation of God is no longer with us. That water is accumulated then in a pond. That's where you get your water of life. But He is no longer there to rain upon you. He's gone. Christ was here for 3 years. Muhammad was for 23 years, and what he left behind was the Quran, for instance, which became like the pond from which all the people could go and receive this water of life. In Christianity we have the Gospels, which is the repository of the words of Christ, and it is like a pond of water to which people, the saints and scholars of Christianity, went to it. They took this water of life and they took it away and distributed it and gave this water of life to everyone. This is how other religions grew. In this dispensation, Baha'u'llah has brought an ocean for us, really an ocean. But in the past, when the Prophet passed away, he left this water of life free to people to use it the way they wanted it, which meant that everybody was free. If you have a pond of water in your house and hundreds of people are at it, what will happen to that water of life? To that water? It will become adulterated, because everybody pushes his pots and pans in it and washes things into it, and after a while that water loses its purity. It's adulterated. This is what happened to older religions. The founder of the faith brought the water of life, but he left it freely to his followers. He said, yes, this is for you. And the followers really so much adulterated it. They added things to it, to the Word of God. They took away things from the Word of God. They interpreted the Word of God their ways. They pulled it into pieces the way they did it. And so they created sects and divisions. They adulterated it. And now we look at these religions, there are hundreds of sects. It's because man has had the freedom to use this. Now Baha'u'llah has done entirely a new thing altogether, which the prophets of the past had not done. Now why they didn't do it now, this is an important point. You must not think that the prophets of the past did not know. Baha'u'llah, as you know, has given us a covenant, firm covenant. He has put a wall around this great ocean, and he said nobody has the right to touch it, nobody has the right to interpret it. The other manifestations of God didn't do this. You mustn't say, oh well, they didn't do it because they didn't know. This is far from the truth. The reason they didn't do it was because mankind in those days were not mature enough to be held responsible. Because once you have a covenant, you will have to be responsible. In the same way that I was giving you the example of a child rolling in mud, coming back with his new suit of clothes. He rolls in mud and he comes home. Well, he's not to be held responsible. Only when he grows up, you can give him responsibility. You give him a new suit of clothes, he goes back, he goes out. But if he rolls in mud, as I said, he will be in trouble. So you see, mankind had not reached the age of maturity to be able to hold on to the terms of a covenant, which is very disciplinary in its nature. You do not have to interpret the words of God. This is a great discipline. But in the past, they did. And so different religions in the past were divided into sects. And yet those sects grew together. For instance, in Christianity, you will see that in the early days, the Christian faith was divided into 3 or 4 major sects. But each sect grew upon the tree of Christianity. Each one drew its sustenance from it. You couldn't say one of them didn't draw the sustenance from the teaching of Christ. It was like a tree which had several branches. But today it's different, very different. There is only one branch, and anyone who deviates is cut off. And when you cut it off, you don't have to fight it. It will dry by itself. Now in this dispensation, as I said, Baha'u'llah has brought for us an ocean of revelation. But he did not give that revelation to us directly and say, all right, this is my revelation, I brought it for you, I give it to you. He didn't do that. He brought it for us, but he didn't give it to us. I think we mentioned that somehow in passing yesterday, reference. He didn't give it to us. He gave it instead to the person of Abdul Baha. And Abdul Baha became the container of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. All the forces of the revelation of Baha'u'llah were placed within Abdul Baha, to such an extent that he had the powers of the manifestation. Although he was not a manifestation of God, he had the powers of the manifestation of God. It's like the moon. When you look at the moon, it has light, and it is beautiful light, but it is not of itself. It has not a light of itself. It is reflected upon it. Whereas the sun, like a manifestation of God, has its own light and its own heat. Abdul Baha here is like the moon, which gives light. By virtue of being the container of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, he had all the powers of the manifestation conferred upon him. He knew what was in your heart, just as Baha'u'llah knew. And he had all the powers. And his words, although is not the word of God in that sense, but it has the same validity as the words of Baha'u'llah. In fact, in one sense, his words are more authentic than those of Baha'u'llah. Did you ever think of that? The words of Abdul Baha could be more authentic than the words of Baha'u'llah. For example, if you ever come across a statement that Baha'u'llah has made a statement, say, and Abdul Baha says this, really, he may make his statement completely opposite to it. Which one would you take? The words of Baha'u'llah or the words of Abdul Baha? You don't take the words of Baha'u'llah. You take the words of Abdul Baha because he is the interpreter of the word. So in that sense, his words become more authentic if they seem to be contrary to it, because he is giving us an interpretation which we may not even understand, but it is he who can interpret for us. Yes? Yes, of course. The words of Shoghi Effendi are the same thing, because he is the interpreter of the word of God. But this is very rare that this may happen. It's very rare. But if it has happened, there are some cases. I'll give you an example of it. Baha'u'llah's secretary has written, he said that Bab and Baha'u'llah had met out physically in Tehran. It is in one of the tablets which Mirza Agha Jan, Baha'u'llah's secretary, has written. And you know, Baha'u'llah's secretary did not write anything of himself. Everything that he was written, it was dictated to him, even though it appears in his own, as if it is his own composition. But it was all composed by Baha'u'llah, everything that he has written. Now Abdul Baha says they never met personally, individually. So whose words we take? We take the words of Abdul Baha. You see, this is how we have to understand this. Now, I was saying that Abdul Baha in here becomes the container of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And yesterday, those of you who were here, I was describing how Baha'u'llah is like the summit of a mountain, and Abdul Baha being a servant that no other human being on this earth can reach him as low as Abdul Baha in servitude. He is the lowest of all in servitude. He is like a valley. Baha'u'llah like the summit of a mountain, and Abdul Baha like a deepest valley. And so when the water pours down from the top of the mountain, it accumulates in the lowest valley. And so all the forces of the revelation of Baha'u'llah are accumulated within the person of Abdul Baha. And then there is another thing you must remember, that the center, if I wanted to put water in this glass, and the water is pure, this glass must be empty. If it is not empty, when I pour water in it, it's going to be adulterated. And Abdul Baha was that empty of his own self. He had no will of himself. He submitted his will to that of Baha'u'llah completely, utterly. And so he was a stainless mirror, as Shoghi Effendi describes him, a stainless mirror which reflected the light of Baha'u'llah in perfection. If the mirror is not stainless, it will not be able to reflect it fully. And so it was a completely empty and pure vessel in which Baha'u'llah poured his revelation within it, the forces of his revelation. And you must not think also that Abdul Baha tried very hard and tried to become a very outstanding person as it was, and emptied himself. In a sense he did, maybe, I don't know. But he was certainly not a human being like you and I. He was created for this purpose by God. It was a gift of Baha'u'llah to mankind. It was a part of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. In the same way that revelation comes from Baha'u'llah and it is from God who sends it to us. Abdul Baha was also a gift of God to mankind. He had the makings of being pure and empty of self. And so he was a perfect exemplar for the teachings. Now, Abdul Baha, during the 29 years of his ministry, he enriched the Baha'i writings, the revelation of Baha'u'llah was enriched by it. He expounded it, he explained it to us, he put it in simple words for us, he guided us, he helped us how to live up to those teachings. And then, of course, as you know, here comes the story of self again, comes up. This ambition, this ego, as I said, is the greatest enemy. There were people who had ego, great ambitions to become leaders. And when Baha'u'llah passed away, and Baha'u'llah told us very clearly in his will and testament, he said, everything I have brought is within Abdul Baha. I'm paraphrasing his words, or paraphrasing the thought even. But this is what he said really. Turn to him for anything you want. Outside him there is nothing. And yet there were some ambitious men who as soon as Baha'u'llah passed away, thought now the field is open for them. And they wanted leadership, just like religious leaders. You know, today we have plenty of them. This shouldn't be a surprise to us. Today the world is full of leaders. Everybody wants to become leaders. So you see how much we have a lot of ambitious men. Now I'm not saying that in government whatever they do is not our problem. They're not worried about that. They are all ambitious. Okay, let them be. And I don't think that it is bad to be ambitious in your work. Why not? You want to be, if you're doing any work, why don't you, we should do it in such a way that we become distinguished. We progress, we go higher up in your work. This is not a bad thing, provided we do it in the right way. And not to try to kill a lot of people on the way, but do it in the right way. A Baha'i who is working, whatever your profession, you must try to perfect it. You must try to be distinguished. If you're an engineer, be a distinguished engineer. If you're a doctor, be a distinguished doctor. If you're an administrator, why not? But we are saying in faith, in the faith of God, there is no room for ambition. And these ambitious men wanted to become leaders. There were so many of them. So many of them. And most of them were outstanding teachers of the faith, who thought this is the opportunity to rise up and break up this faith, like the old days, into sects. And so they began to attack the center of the covenant, like men who come to attack this great wall which Baha'u'llah has placed around this ocean. They wanted to get through to this ocean, but they didn't succeed. And at the same time, I can tell you, it brought so much suffering to the person of Abdul Baha that not until you study the history of that period, and maybe I don't think that history is yet really compiled, of the history of covenant breaking during the time of Abdul Baha, in English anyhow. When you read that history of the covenant breaking and the sufferings which were inflicted upon Abdul Baha, you will not believe it. The things that they did. How much they went, these Abdul Baha's brothers, his family, the family of Baha'u'llah, they all rose up against him. Every one of the members of the family of Baha'u'llah, with the exception of a very few, rose up against Abdul Baha. And then, hand in hand with some very outstanding teachers of the faith for many years, not only misrepresentations, but so many times they plotted to take his life. They did everything to humiliate, to misrepresent, and to dishonor him. All the time. This was going on, the intrigues that were going on all the time. Now it's beyond the scope of our discussions here to even go into it. Study that. You will find that no human being can ever go through so much opposition and afflictions. And yet Abdul Baha dealt with it personally with loving kindness, but for the community's sake with great firmness. And he said, those who were the breakers of the covenant, those who have arisen to destroy the cause of God, he announced them as covenant breakers, and we do not associate with them. That's all we do not do with the covenant breakers. You do not hate them, you do not fight with them, you do not try to destroy them, but we just do not associate with them. And this is a very important principle. Abdul Baha said it's like a disease, infectious disease, which the doctor will isolate you. I mean, this happens in life. The doctor isolates you if you have an infectious disease. And this is because he said if 1,000 healthy people go near that one defected person, that diseased person, they're all going to take this disease. The 1,000. That one person will not become better by associating with 1,000 healthy men, but 1,000 healthy men will become affected by one person who is diseased. You see, this process of covenant breaking, which did not exist in the past, they existed in the past, but that it was not dealt in the past. Nobody had the power, the authority to deal with those who break the covenant. Those who broke the covenant, if there was such a thing as a covenant. In Islam, there was a verbal arrangement or a verbal statement which was made by Muhammad, describing who should be the follower of Muhammad, who should be succeeding Muhammad. But his followers divided, and they disagreed, and they divided into two major sects. But they were both growing again. You know, there was no question of cutting anybody off. They were both Muslims of different sects. But in this age, anyone who have risen up against the center of the faith, he is cut off. He's cut off. And I will explain to you this process of covenant breaking and the process of throwing away somebody out of the faith, cutting him off, as I said, like a branch which deviates and you cut it off. And when you cut it off, it drops on the ground. And for a few days it may be green, maybe a little life in it. But eventually it will perish. We don't have to fight them. We don't have to hate them. We don't have to do anything. But we do not associate with them. And the best example, again, to know this is to look at your own human body. The human body is the best example. If you look at the human body, you will find that a healthy person can always withstand any disease or germs or anything which comes from the outside. If you're healthy, you're not going to be affected by it. We always go through these germs and through these things. You always through all around us, it's full of germs and various things. But you get over it. But if ever you allow poison to enter inside your bloodstream and circulate, that's the end. You can't stand that. It will destroy you right away. And so the body has a system. The body has a machinery. The kidneys, this is the work of the kidneys. They inspect the bloodstream, if you like to call it. And they pick up anything which is poisonous. All the poisonous material are collected from the body, from the bloodstream. They won't let it go through the bloodstream. And at intervals, these impurities are thrown out. Isn't that right? If there was no kidneys, you know what happened to a person? Probably you would die after, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, a few hours. All the poisons is destroying you. That's the end. And so all the impurities are thrown out. And once it is thrown out, you feel healthy. This machinery. The hands of the cause, it's their function. To be vigilant. And if there is anyone who is a poison circulating within the community, they'll throw him out with the approval of the House of Justice today. In the future, they will devise a different system perhaps. But there is a machinery. And it does not mean that anybody who opposes the faith in some ways, you throw him out in that way and you call him a covenant breaker. A covenant breaker is a person who opposes the center of the faith actively. For instance, you may find a person who says, look, I am not a Baha'i. I was a Baha'i, but I'm not a Baha'i. Okay, this is not a problem. You withdraw his name. And in fact, you will love him, and you will help him, you will associate with him. Or a person may have broken some laws, and his voting rights is removed from him. Still, you can associate with him. There's no problem there. He will one day may come back again into the faith. But a covenant breaker is a person who actively opposes the center of the faith. For instance, he says, I believe in Baha'u'llah, but I don't accept anything that Abdul Baha has said, and I'm going to oppose it. Or somebody may say, I believe Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, as they did, but I will oppose anything that Shoghi Effendi will say. And I am a Baha'i, and I'm coming to your 19-day feast, and I'm going to oppose everything that Shoghi Effendi has said. I won't let that happen. Or somebody today might say, look, I accept all the writings, but I will not oppose anything that I'll oppose anything that the House of Justice says. I'm coming to your 19-day feast, to your assemblies, to your communities, and I'm going to oppose everything they say. Well, this is the poison which is trying to circulate inside. And this we will not allow to happen. It's like a cancerous disease which happens. Sometimes you may go and the doctor says, I must cut your hand off right away. You won't object to that. You will welcome it. You say, all right, cut it off. Why? Because you know that if that cancer is allowed to remain there, it's going to destroy you. This is exactly what covenant breaking is. But fortunately, now we live at a time that we are talking about covenant breaking. Very few of them exist today who are opposing the House of Justice. Very few of them. And they are so, we are not worried about them. We are not doing anything with them. We are just leaving it to themselves. And as I said, we don't hate them, we don't associate with them. If they write me a letter, I will not answer them. I will not read it. I'll throw it away. It's poison.
The covenant breakers have, with every major change, the death of Baha'u'llah and Shoghi Effendi.
Pardon?
The covenant breakers have arisen with every major change, with the death of the central figure. There won't be any more of that. The House of Justice won't die. It'll be the same as they used to.
I don't know.
Can it be?
I don't know. There may well be. There are still some who oppose the House of Justice. I think as long as Shoghi Effendi mentions, he says that in every faith, people arose and divided religions into sects. They violated the covenants. In this age, he says it's the same. People will have violated the covenant, and in fact have violated it much more vigorously than any other previous dispensation. But he says the difference, and therefore probably this covenant breaking may be there till the end of this dispensation. But he says the distinguishing feature of this faith is that they have not succeeded in bringing division. They have dissipated themselves, and this is the true history of the faith. All of those things, people who rose up against the faith, where are they? Those covenant breakers of Abdul Baha, they are gone and forgotten and finished and part of the history. If you want to go to Akka to find out the grave of Muhammad Ali, who was the arch breaker of the covenant, you won't find it. You don't know where he is, even buried. If you go to those hundreds of people who rose up against Shoghi Effendi amongst his family and others, where are they? They're gone, finished, completely finished, without doing anything to them. They're gone. And today there may well be a few here and there. But one thing which is sure is that the cause of God will not become divided into sects. If you look at the history of other religions, you will find the sects were created immediately after the Prophet was gone. The body of Muhammad wasn't buried yet, that his followers were divided into two major sects, and the fighting broke up amongst them right away. In this dispensation, this is why Baha'u'llah says this is a day that shall not be followed by night. Now I will explain to you in another way what covenant breaking is, just on a basis of nature. In nature, what is in nature covenant breaking? Just to explain to you by using the laws of nature. As I said, from nature we learn everything, really. First of all, do you know that, look at nature, you will find always opposite things attract each other. The north pole of a magnet and the south pole of a magnet are opposites. They'll attract to each other. But the two similar poles, they repulse. If you bring two north poles of a magnet together, there is a force of repulsion. Now, this is in nature. And it's the same thing in spiritually. God is one end, but the opposite to it is man, the opposite pole. God is sovereign Lord of all. The opposite to it is servitude, humility. You see, these are two opposite things. And these two things attract each other. God loves to see a servant. He is attracted to a servant. He attracts to himself. But if ever somebody wants to put himself on the same level as God, or when I say God, I mean, say, the manifestation of God, or the center of the covenant, it doesn't matter. If a person wants to put himself on the same level as Baha'u'llah, or put himself on the same level as Abdul Baha, or put himself on the same level as Shoghi Effendi, you know, the same level, there is a force of repulsion. This is covenant breaking. As long as you are a servant, there is no problem. But as soon as you want to bring yourself on the same level, knowing what this is, knowing this is a manifestation of God, having recognized Him, you want to bring yourself on the same level, immediately there is a repulsion. Now we want to know, how do we know we bring ourselves on that same level? How do I know that how can we prove that Muhammad Ali, for instance, brought himself on the same level as Abdul Baha? How do we know that those who oppose Shoghi Effendi brought themselves on the same level of Abdul Baha? How can we say this? Now, there is one test for it. And the test, again, you will find in life. If I challenge you to fight with me, you and I have to be of the same strength, or else I would never dare to come and say, let us fight. You only fight with someone who is your equal or less than you. A child will never come and challenge a grown-up man. Or you and I would never challenge one of these boxers to come and fight with us, because we are not equals with them. If I challenge you to come and, if I challenge you, if I oppose you, it means I bring myself on the same level. At least. Because I'm opposing you, I'm challenging you. That is the way you can know it. When Muhammad Ali challenged Abdul Baha, he brought himself on the same level. And this is repulsion. When somebody challenges and opposes Abdul Baha or Shoghi Effendi, he puts himself on the same level. By virtue of opposing him, it is an indication that you consider yourself at least an equal. Otherwise you wouldn't. That is how we know. Once they oppose, this is the criterion. Once they oppose the center of the cause, then this is covenant breaking. And that has to be established, by the way, by the center of the faith. Nobody can proclaim somebody a covenant breaker. Now, why I mentioned the importance of covenant breaking and steadfastness in the covenant is that we must not only look at the history of the faith in the past and all the covenant breakings, that's part of history, which give us a great courage in the faith. It's a great pride for us, a great joy and a pride. We can mention it with pride that so many people rose up against the faith, rose up against Abdul Baha, rose up against Baha'u'llah, rose up from within, rose up against Shoghi Effendi, tried to break the faith into pieces, and they did not succeed. And as Ruhiya Khanum once in one of her talks mentioned, she said, every one of these covenant breakings is a ribbon we wear in this battle. You know, a ribbon that you wear, a medal. Each one of them has proved the invincibility of the covenant of God, that you cannot break it through. even the most fierce onslaught which had taken place in the faith had not succeeded in breaking through this great ocean. So you see, and now look at what happened at the end. Now I have no time in here to talk to you about this, and it's just coming to an end. But look at what happened when Shoghi Effendi passed away. When Shoghi Effendi passed away, the machinery of the covenant, this wall around this whole, the cause of God, was so strong that even though he had not left a will and testament, and I can tell you we don't want to go into that, the great wisdoms of not writing the will and testament. You must not think that Shoghi Effendi forgot to write a will and testament. The great wisdom. And if he had written a will and testament, I'm not going to go into it, you would see that he could have violated some of the basic principles of our faith. Now, I am not at all prepared to go into this question now, because there is no time. It takes a good while to discuss this. Now we understand this. He could not have written. His hands was tied. And in spite of the fact that there were no will and testament, and in spite of the fact that the Baha'is were not only Persians who spoke the same language or only English, but that they were scattered throughout the length and breadth of this earth, coming from so many diverse backgrounds, and yet the faith of Baha'u'llah remained unshaken. The community remained unshaken. And when one of the hands came up, Mason Remy, and he said, "Follow me," it was only laughable, the consequences. Where is he? What's happened? It all evaporated into the air. The Baha'i community remained steadfast. It's just like every interval, the impurities were thrown out. That's all that happens. And it was a good thing. All the impurities, like the impurities of the body, which are thrown out every intervals. And even now, you said there are no possibility, you suggested there were no possibilities of covenant breaking. Well, there may be. There are always ambitious men. And somebody may come and say, well, now let us see what, they may oppose the House of Justice. I don't know. There are already some who are doing it. Very few. You can count them with the fingers of your hand throughout the Baha'i world, really. Now, this is a stage that we have reached, and we have to be grateful to those souls who defended the covenant of God, who defended this cause. As I said, they rallied around Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi. There was a time that Shoghi Effendi, not one member of his family remained faithful. Not one member of the family of Abdul Baha, they all rose up against him. And you might ask yourself, why is it that the person now this is the last thing I'm going to say, and we close this meeting because it's getting late. The last thing I'm going to say to you. Often people may ask themselves this question, how is it that of all the people who should rise up against Abdul Baha were his closest people, his family, his friends, his brothers? Why should be that all the family of the master should rise up against Shoghi Effendi? They were the closest to him. You would expect that they wouldn't rise up against him. Now you see, this is a very significant thing to ask. Now the only way I can describe it to you is this. That if you were going to see a great scientist, say you and I were going to see a great, celebrated scientist, say for instance if Einstein was alive, we were all going to see him. Let's go and see him. Now either you know mathematics or you don't when you go and see Einstein or someone like him. You either know mathematics or you don't. If you know mathematics, when you go there and you sit down and you listen, you see him on the blackboard working with his theories and all the formulas he has worked out, and you see the way he has come out with such genius way he has proposed his theories. You will be so carried away into the world of mathematics and physics that you consider him as the greatest man, and you come out of the room so excited that if anybody asks you what was he wearing, you don't know. What would it look like even, you may not know, because you are carried away with his theories. But if you didn't know mathematics, and you looked at what he's saying, and especially if you're sitting in the front row, now some of the people who are sitting in the front row have seen a lot of things, they would say, look at this man, look at his You won't understand what he's saying, but you can look at him very clearly because you're sitting very close to him. He would say, oh gosh, look at this fellow. Why they make such a fuss of him? You see now, because you don't know mathematics. And so when you come out, you find a lot of faults with him. This was not he was talking nonsense, and I didn't understand it, and he was having you see all his personal side. Now this is exactly what happens with the manifestation of God. And those who are near him, his relations and his family are very close to him. They are sitting like the front row. And they have no spiritual qualities. You can be sure of this. No spiritual qualities. The only sign of spiritual qualities is if they are servants, if they are servitude. Like Abdul Baha, who I told you would never enter into the room of Baha'u'llah without prostrating himself at his feet and considering himself as utter nothingness. Now if you're not like that, you don't know mathematics in that example. Now he knew it. He had seen nothing but the greatness of Baha'u'llah. But these people who had nothing at all, no spiritual qualities, but full of ambition, they had no share of the spiritual powers which was within him. And this is why Baha'u'llah says how many the people who have been in his presence who hadn't seen him at all. And how many people who were never in his presence and they had understood and recognized his greatness and glory. These people were sitting very close, and so all they saw was a human being. They saw him, he has to eat, he has to sleep. If he gets tired, if he doesn't sleep tonight, he gets sick. It's just like everybody else. And because they had not seen the great glory which was within him, therefore they were the first to rise up. You see now how it is when you're very close? They always say that when you're close to a lamp, there is a shadow near the lamp. You know these lamps which have a stand, if you look at it, there is a shadow there. The light goes around. You're close to it. When you're close to the manifestation of God, tests are very great. The slightest impurities, the slightest condition of ambition will destroy the soul. But we must thank God in this day that we have none of these problems, although we have to really deepen ourselves in the knowledge of the covenant. And I wish there was time that one could talk about the covenant. That this in itself is something which will need a long time to discuss this. But now I feel that we have come to the end, whether good or bad. We have talked a great deal, and I know that some of you are going to go. How many are going tomorrow? Well, everybody is going. So never mind. No. Huh? Oh no, everybody is going away, tomorrow. They won't see us tomorrow. He's going away tomorrow. Oh, there's a few people. Well, I would like to say to those of you who are going that for me it has been a greatest privilege and a greatest joy to be with you, really. And I hope that I haven't made you tired of all these things. And as I said, if you want to forget everything, forget those points. Just a few of them you can remember. But always remember that Baha'u'llah has to be with us. This is the thing. And this is the whole, the essence of all that we have said in our service. And that He comes to us to our assistance. He helps us. He supports us. And all this love that we have for each other, the joy and the love that is in our hearts, is not because of ourselves. Now don't mistake that. All this love which brings us together and makes us to become like one people is not because of us, that we are very important people, that we are very special people in that sense. All of this love and this joy and this unity is because of Baha'u'llah. It is His revelation. It is the forces that He has released in the world, and it is that which comes through our hearts and makes us to become one. Otherwise, if you divorce that from it, what had we in common? All of us. Very little. Nothing. And in spite of all our weaknesses, we were talking about the weaknesses of our assemblies. In spite of all the weaknesses of our assemblies, look at the way the faith is growing. Look at the way we are holding on together. If it wasn't for the cause of God and the power of Baha'u'llah, do you think we would be staying together for more than one day in a local assembly, you will disband it immediately and say, go home, we don't want to get into this thing. Oh no. But it is the cause of God, and it is the early stages. And the only thing which will help us to really become happy people and to see that the cause goes forward is to love each other through Baha'u'llah. Love, if this love is not there, then we have to fight the spiritual battle. If I cannot see everybody with the eye of love and unity, then I have to fight my spiritual battle. And as I said, we must look into each other's faces and see a trace of Baha'u'llah, and then it will all work. Well.
One question on terminology. In English translations, Soviet Effendi talks much of the greater covenant. I think he means that of Baha'u'llah. Yes, it's Baha'u'llah. One way God, I think God. And then the lesser is Baha'u'llah, and so on for two manifestations.
That's right.
But besides, at one point he says sometimes God is greater plan interferes or something, intercedes. Well, so as you see it, the ocean, the immersive subject is sort of coming to Baha'u'llah. Bigger ocean up above God, and then the previous sort of
Well, I suppose you can say these things.
I'm asking on there now.
Yes. Well, the covenant of God with man is something all-encompassing. The covenant of Baha'u'llah is only for his followers. It's only addressed to the followers. And that the plan of God is something overall, which will include all human beings. And Shoghi Effendi says sometimes these two plans will run into each other. Well, friends, I want to say farewell to some of you who are going, and I hope that we will see and hear about you all wonderful things that happens in this country. And I cannot say to you how much I have been happy and delighted to meet with the friends. So, these questions, I'll leave them on this table until tomorrow. Oh no, we are not supposed to put anything here. Okay, well, we'll take them. And so, thank you very much. Thank you. Oh no, please, no, please, sit down. Please, sit down. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Are we going?
Yeah, we'll be here this evening. The program begins at 7. We'll be here.
Well, thank you, John. I feel that we could deal with some of these questions, and then as we go on, I'm sure a lot of subjects will open up that we can talk about. Yesterday and day before, as some of you may know, we dealt with a comprehensive sort of survey of the life of a Baha'i. And the theme was, what should we do? How can we live to enable our faith to grow? And I think we still can talk about that, naturally. You can talk around it and about this. But I think this morning I will pick up this question here. Is the person who has written this here? You have. It says, please tell the story. Oh, story about circumambulation. I thought you meant the wisdom of it, or the yes. Well, first of all, I think I will mention this. Circumambulating, as you know, in the faith, this is a way of showing one's love and devotion to one that you worship as your God, as your Lord. You circumambulate around him, and this is actually a law. This is a principle of nature. Again, in nature, you can find a parallel for this. You will find always an object which depends upon its creator, it revolves around it. For instance, the earth revolves around the sun. It's in love with it. This is a love relationship. And the satellite revolves around the earth. It is the force of love, really, as we know. I mean, from the point of view of physics, we know what holds the satellite in motion. It is that force of attraction, which is the love and the speed of its action that make it circumambulate its beloved. And so it is a law of nature that if you depend on someone as your creator, you circumambulate around it. And this is why when you go to the shrines, the act of circumambulating the shrine is an act of devotion to your Lord. In the writings we come across this statement many a times, that the lovers circumambulate around their beloved. Now, the story of circumambulation, which is a story I mentioned to our friend in here, and he has recorded it in his tape. I think I am always reluctant to talk about these accounts unless it is in writing. I feel we must be very accurate in quoting these things, because when the disciples of Baha'u'llah have recorded such incidents or such accounts, they have recorded it to the best of their ability and knowledge, and all we can do is to translate it and convey it. To try to put our own words to it, it sort of snowballs a little bit. I mentioned yesterday that we must not try to verbally communicate these stories, and this particular story that you have asked me to say, and I don't know how you come to know about it, probably Red must have told you this. He's hiding away there. This is already recorded in the videotape. Well, I will tell you the story, but don't go and tell everybody about this. Really, just keep it for yourself. Because I say this to you. First of all, such stories which relate to us the greatness of the cause, and such stories which relate to us things like miracles, things which sounds and looks like miracles. These things we are not supposed to consider them as miracles, because Baha'u'llah says, do not attribute any miracles to him. He says this will degrade the station of the manifestation of God. These accounts are only good for people who have seen them. And often people who had seen some of these accounts, I remember when I was a young boy, and they wouldn't tell us. They were very reluctant to talk about it, because they didn't want to make it a point by which people would say, oh yes, this is the proof of the truth of this faith. You know, we never bring miracles as the proof of the truth of this faith. And as I said, Baha'u'llah says no one should attribute miracles to him. Although Abdul Baha has said that you can talk about it because it will give people joy and excitement, and it will uplift the souls to think about it. But we are not attributing miracles here. As I said, Baha'u'llah says it will degrade the station of the manifestation of God. Now, they were reluctant. Those people who were the origin of all these stories, they were reluctant to say it because, and especially when there were people who were not Baha'is, they would never say it to them. They would wait till people really become deep in the faith, who could sort of take it and put it in the right perspective. Now I will tell you the story of Baha'u'llah. You know that when Baha'u'llah was in the house of Abud, that's the time that he, as you know, he spent about 7 years in those two houses, which is now called the house of Abud. And he had never seen a blade of grass, really, something green, trees, which he was so fond of. He really kept, as I said yesterday, the manifestation of God submits himself entirely to what his enemies do to him. He never uses his powers to stop them persecuting him. And so Baha'u'llah submitted to his enemies, and he did not leave that house. Although several governors who had come, they were so friendly. Some of them became so much the admirers of Abdul Baha, and in one or two cases they even met Baha'u'llah in the house of Abud, that they became so much carried away with his powers, and they saw his glory, that they openly said that of course Baha'u'llah could leave the town if he wanted it, and Abdul Baha could leave the town if he wanted it. But you see, they were incarcerated in that city according to the edict of the Sultan. Now Baha'u'llah had mentioned to Abdul Baha on one occasion that it is 9 years, he said, that he had not seen any sceneries of green and trees and flowers. And Abdul Baha immediately realized that his will now is that he should leave this place. And as you all may have heard, I'm sure, he went out and he rented these gardens outside Baghdad, outside Akka, known as the mansion of Mazra'e nowadays. The mansion of Mazra'e, as you see it now, those of you who have seen it, has been developed further since those days of Baha'u'llah. In those days were much smaller and much more primitive than what it is today, but certain basic part of the house is still there. The room of Baha'u'llah is still there, and all those things. Things have been added to it. Things have not really, there's not much change in it, except things have been added to it. Rooms have been added to it. So Abdul Baha rented this for a very reasonable price. And then he arranged the making of a special carriage. In those days there were no such thing as carriages around. And then he came to Baha'u'llah and he said, the carriage is ready, the gardens, the house outside is ready, and that he said, please, you can come out and let's go. Baha'u'llah said to him, no. He said no, he was a prisoner and he was staying there. Now here is a point that you must remember. I mentioned yesterday, the relationship that Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha had was not the same relationship as an ordinary son and the father. You know how it is, how informal is the relationship of the son and the father. That Abdul Baha could sort of insist and persist and say, oh please come on, let's go, and this sort of thing. It wasn't like this. Baha'u'llah was his Lord. He had recognized him so much that none of us can ever recognize Baha'u'llah to that extent. And he showed such humility and such submissiveness to Baha'u'llah that no person can ever do. And in fact, it was Abdul Baha who taught the believers. You know, whenever believers came to the Holy Land, to attain the presence of Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha would prepare them for coming in contact with Baha'u'llah. He would even look at their clothes and see whether their clothes were good enough. And if it wasn't, which in many cases were not, he would give them a new coat, new clothes to wear, so that when they go into the presence of Baha'u'llah, they are very well, you know, they look their best. And So, and he taught them the lessons in humility and self-effacement and reverence